Okay, it's recording. All right, so ready, Charlie?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so it's at 3 o'clock. Thank you for joining, Charlie. Let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. So we are excited to have you on board. Today, we are going to discuss about Salesforce COE, primarily on the governance and administration side. And I am excited to welcome Charlie. Charlie Havens is my colleague, and he is part of HESC. And before we get started, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Velu Palani. I am from HESC. I lead their Salesforce platform, and we are a large insurance company based in Chicago, Illinois. And I also moderate the CRM COE, and I've been in the ecosystem for a while. I wanted to share my experience in terms of setting up COE and how do you set it up, how do you run, what are the challenges that we face with respect to many areas. Today is primarily going to be on COE with respect to Salesforce governance and admin. And as you see, Charlie is here and he's going to be my co-panelist. So we are going to discuss about how do you go about setting it up and what are the challenges. Before we get started, I want to have Charlie introduce himself and we will get started. Charlie, please come in.
Good afternoon, Velu. Pleasure to once again be doing a presentation with you. And I remember one we did for CAN TV way back when. That was a lot of fun.
Yes.
I've been in Salesforce about 11 years, both in small organizations and in several consulting companies, and have been involved in rolling out Salesforce in multiple instances within an organization, as well as in an organization that had 7 or 8 instances and wanted to consolidate them down to one. And presently in an organization with quite a good number of environments, many, and in charge of governance and administration group there at HCSC.
Great, Charlie. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. It is always fun to talk to you and get your insights into what's going on in the ecosystem. It's growing rapidly. The challenges that we face every day is changing rapidly as well. So as we talk about a topic today, so the topics for today is why the governance, specifically around Salesforce administration and governance with respect to COE. And we will also talk about the scope and the roles. And is it really going to help or is it going to hinder? And we also talk about organization structures and how do you operationalize, and talk about metrics and Q&A. And so when you look at why governance and admin for COE, and we'll talk about the governance and admin perspective. As you see here, why COE is important for governance and admin perspective. And you see here, go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, so I like to start with the notion of resilience. I do so personally as well as organizationally. It was a concept I discovered several years ago, and it was very interesting to me to think about the difference between strength and resilience. A piece of glass can be very strong, but if it's suspended between 2 points and you jump on it, it's likely to break. a piece of steel suspended between 2 points uh, is likely to bend, but it may spring back and actually um, return to where it was before. And that second notion is the notion of resilience. Its ability to resist and recover from potentially damaging events. And I find that personally important, but really so in the Salesforce ecosystem. And resilience doesn't happen just by producing a product that meets a business value. The business value may say we need to be able to produce more customers. And Salesforce may be very much the right tool for helping deliver that. But that if resilience isn't part of how that's built or how it's governed, um, when there are damaging events that occur, we're not likely to survive. And so it's from that perspective that I like to come at governance. And the second, I'm not going to go through all of these, but the second notion is that what we're doing is enforcing corporate policies, specifically around risk mitigation and best practices as they're applied to Salesforce specifics. Um, they may be very general and generic at the corporate level, and then need to figure out what do they mean in Salesforce? What does segregation of duties have to do with Salesforce, and how do we apply that? And why might we want to apply it? Velu, you've heard me mention recently about the SolarWinds incident that's happened to a number of organizations in the federal government and elsewhere, the hacking piece. And one of the ways that they were able to get around multi-factor authentication was by getting access to a very low level environment that was considered not to have valuable data. And once they got access as a system admin in this environment that no one was protecting, from there they could get a token that told them how the rest of the authentication system worked, and they could spoof it. The corporate policy may say all environments are to be protected. And we say, why? It doesn't matter. There's no data there. Um, so figuring out what is the intention here of that policy? What is it trying to protect? Why might it be important? And then what does it actually mean in Salesforce, in the Salesforce world? Um, and to be able to get compliance requires some procedures and tools in terms of what that means. What are the guidelines we're going to provide people who are working in this environment? And if we just stay focused on the top side of this, becoming resilient and avoiding risk, it becomes really difficult to get business value out of Salesforce because we're just going to be slugging along. And so the bottom side of this list is all about balancing the top side with business value and driving toward business value, enabling it to be continually built and deployed, and and supporting it through DevOps processes that allow that to accelerate.
Very good, Charlie. No, it's a good perspective, right? So when you talk about governance and admin, if you have to relate governance, we relate procedures to the governance and we relate guidelines to admin, right? So you want to administer your environment, you need guidelines. You want to govern your environment, you need to have procedures. So it's a very well articulated, Charlie. At the same time, the goal of the governance and administrative team is to make sure you are monitoring, you are administering, you are safeguarding, and you are improving the lives of the users who are using the system. So it is a excellent way of doing it. And so when you think about, we go to the next slide, Charlie, here. governance, admin scope, and role within COE. So, would you like to share your insight into what does this mean for us, for people who are listening to us? What is the role here? How do you scope it? So, would you mind
Uh,
helping us to understand?
well, I think I want to start by saying that continuous delivery has to be our assumption,
Mm,
and that Salesforce isn't something where you deploy it and it's one and done and you forget it. You are continually iterating on your solution, and what business needs to have delivered continues to evolve and change, and so you've got to have a platform that's capable of providing that continuous delivery, and um, and then within that platform, what are the components that need to be administered? So you've got user and service account access. So how do you control access? Well, maybe you're using SSO, maybe you're using some form of multi-factor authentication. How do you identify who the people are that should have that access, and then what entitlements ought they have once they've got access, and how do you control and manage that? Um, Metadata and data become valuable, and the solar winds piece is the story, most recent story that really drives home this metadata protection. Um, and I think on the environment management side, um, it has become really clear to me that being able to have the bandwidth to deal with access and management and entitlements and privacy and protection, the only way you can get enough bandwidth to do that is if you got some real management over environment. Environments in Salesforce are so easy to spin up. Add a new sandbox. Somebody wants one. Every developer wants a new one. Whatever. Uh, I came into a setting that had more than a couple hundred of these, and in order to deal with the first full four bullets on this in this section, we really had to pare that down, trying to get it down well under 100. Um, Otherwise, we're spending all of our time trying to govern and administer these environments, and no time for actually being able to do real support in terms of functionality and application support, or moving deployments along, that kind of thing. Um, in terms of governance, there's two things. One is actually interpreting policy into something that's Salesforce related, Salesforce procedures and guidelines
mhm.
that tie into those policies, and and then how do you monitor and advise for that? And I feel like uh, we're really a baby steps trying to be able to do that monitoring and figuring out exactly what metrics we ought to be able to do. We're we're doing it, um, and over time, as we've been starting to advise business and other stakeholders around this, we're getting more and more of their cooperation. Without their cooperation, we can't get compliance, and without their education, they don't know enough to help us comply. So this advising piece becomes really critical uh, in terms of compliance. And then in terms of business continuity, um, having some sort of preparation means more than simply a restoration tool. It means knowing what it is you want to restore to, and at um, what rollback point, and so on and so forth, and who's going to do that. Um, all of this takes incredible amount of effort and time to define and build out. And this is these three areas for me are the scope of a governance and admin group within a COE.
Good, great, Charlie. I mean, if this slide really speaks for what is the scope, and if you, the notion of dividing tasks and responsibilities between pre-delivery, delivery, and post-delivery assumes a waterfall methodology, but it is definitely not waterfall. If you're talking about continuous delivery, it is agile, but within that framework, how do you make sure that you are continuously delivering? So the governance is coming into a major play with Salesforce releasing every year 3 times. You know, we've been doing Salesforce for a long time. Every year, I don't think they ever missed 3 times a year.
No,
No
no.
matter what, whether sun comes up or not, they release it, which
And
is
how do you keep up with all that, Velu?
I think that's why I don't sleep, and you see my hair becoming gray and gray, and so it is an interesting phenomena. For the last 21 years, they've been doing this for every year, 3 times a year, and the constant state of pre-delivery, delivery, and post-delivery for particular features. When Salesforce releases it, the governance team or the admin team, both of them, I mean, here we are talking one and the same, they need to make sure that they are keeping up with that. And it is not a platform to live on. It is one to continuously build the new additional business value upon. It's a profound statement that I'm reading it out from your notes, Charlie. It is one to continuously build new additional business value upon. It is true. There was a Forrester survey. It was an article, and I was also reading and talking to a couple of people, some experts. Most of the people buy Salesforce for because it's cool. It's so cool that hey, let's use the CRM system. But how many people are continuously building value on top of the platform? And I think that is the question that we all should be asking. In my experience in the last so many years that I've been working with the platform, the governance and admin team play a major role. And they are always, we think that they're under the radar, but they are the one administering, monitoring, governing, and safeguarding the environment. And if that team has to be your nucleus of your Salesforce environment. Do you agree with that, Charlie? Am I saying?
Well, yeah, and recently I read something because we've been having conversations about value-driven um, agile processes that are value-driven and how we start with business and what and move those values all the way through the pipeline. Um, and one of the things that struck me in that was that resilience
Mhm.
um, is a business value, um, and and it needs to be called out as such. And there needs to be stories and effort uh, and money spent by business to ensure that the system is resilient.
Absolutely. Very good, Charlie. Let's move on to the next topic. The challenges. I think this, even though it only talks about policy, two challenges, primarily on the enforcement and enablement. Enforcement, enablement. It's like a, um, I would say it's a um, chicken or egg. Unless you enforce, you cannot enable. If you enable, how do you enforce it? Because you need to keep things moving faster. Um, so when I read this, Charlie, enforcing, is it tougher? Is it tougher to enforce or is it tougher to enable?
It's the easiest thing is to take your hands off the steering wheel, and that neither enables nor enforces.
There you go.
Yeah, the easy thing is to say, go for it. And recently, I told you a story about a organization we were part of that uh, where business had been allowed, or stakeholders within the business had been allowed to have access to um, create profiles and so on that weren't fully vetted and didn't comply with procedures and governance. And they had somebody had decided to create two different user accounts in this company, and for the same persons. So
Wow.
each person had two user accounts, and that company decided to add SSO. And now that those people who had two user accounts could not get into the user account that they needed to get into because SSO allowed them to get into one account. Um, so that's a case of taking your hands off the steering wheel. It was neither enabling nor in the end was it enforcing. Um, and so, sometimes what we're asked to do is take our hands off the steering wheel. That's the request. Well, you don't really need to tell me not to have system admin privileges because I'm a really competent person and I know what I'm doing.
Hmm.
And you can let me drive. And I remember when my um, one of my daughters was a teenager, and that was part of her thing is you don't really need to tell me what to do when I'm driving. I know what I'm doing. And um, and yes, at some point that was true. We needed to start out with some guidelines and some playbooks as to under what conditions she was going to drive and getting some experience and whatever. So uh, I think it's getting these procedures and guidelines in place is very painful because it means that people don't get to do what they've always done, and people's egos are sometimes hurt by that because they think that it's that it's directed at them as opposed to um, simply being a matter of trying to put in place a system that will reduce risk. Um, so it takes a lot of communication and collaboration, and some of these RACIs, developing them is quite a negotiating process. Um, I think once everybody accepts that this is where it's going, then you can start to get, okay, how do we make this work better for all of us? How do we speed up the process? How do we keep from getting in your way? What are the things that can be done to support your velocity with delivery?
It's an excellent point of view, Charlie. It's a, if I were to, if somebody says, okay, which is more important, enforcing or enabling? This is always a chicken or egg question, but in my opinion, enforce first. Enablement comes as an
Yeah,
outcome of enforcement. If you are not enforcing, you might be, it's like no traffic light, no cops, no speed detectors, you're driving. Ultimately, what is going to happen? You're going to crash somewhere. You might even die. That's exactly how I look at it. You gotta enforce. Enforcing is not tying your hands, all enforcing it such a way that you have the right traffic condition, traffic lights, traffic rules, and then the proper people are driving the vehicles with the license. That's how the analogy comes here, right, Charlie? In my
yeah,
opinion, if you
yeah.
don't have that attitude and the culture, you got to develop that. It's a, isn't it a fair statement, Charlie?
It is. I'm curious, Relu, in terms of tech debt,
Hmm.
where have you seen it get in the way of delivering business value? How have you seen that play out?
So tech debt is also it is like a COE as a very commonly used word, or sometimes it's overused
Yeah,
to tech debt. So within the Salesforce, I can give some specific examples. If the proper enforcement is not there, oftentimes Salesforce is it's like living in an apartment. resources are limited. You can only consume so much water, hot water. If you consume more than that, you will only get cold water. Sometimes you won't even get water. So similarly, Salesforce has got everything has a limitation, API limitation, object limitation, field limitation. You can only buy, if you have 100 users, you can only provision 100 users. So the tech debt, if you are not managing all this area well, everything can be a tech debt. For example, you have an object only can have up to 800 custom fields.
Yeah.
And it is so easy to add a simple, just like that, yeah, custom field. And let's say you have 2,000, 3,000 users, and everybody gives you a request. What is the best way to do? Add a custom field or put a pick list value? Keep going because you're enabling faster. But what's going to happen? There is a limit. So
Yeah.
these are my examples, common things I see: API calls, object limitations, field limitation. Sometimes they create so many validation rules, you run out of validation rules. And so these are all considered, I consider tech debt, and
Yeah.
sometimes code coverage is not good. So this the governance team, once you have these procedures in place, I think you can eliminate the tech debt. And in my opinion, that's an intangible benefit of having a good governance and admin team, Charlie.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm aware of at the moment is that Salesforce has said that they're retiring API versions up through 30
Hmm.
in June. So any organizations out there that have API versions that are older than that are suddenly going to have functionality not working. Now, between now and June, there are going to be a bunch of organizations spending their energy and their dollars not developing new business value, but fixing their tech debt.
But in my opinion, Charlie, that's called employment. We are unemployment is so bad right now. We got to get employment going.
Yeah,
So that's that could be one of the. It's like a Y2K problem.
yeah,
Right. No, that's great. So let's move on to the next topic, Charlie. So I really like this slide. So when you look at Salesforce COE governance operating structure, in a business world, if you don't have a model, you don't understand. Everything has to have a model, simplicity, cost benefit, operating procedures. So especially when I look at the slide, it is a very simple to understand. Because if this is, yeah, a subcomponent of COE, governance and administration is subcomponent of overall Salesforce COE. The model, the credit goes to you, Charlie. You did a great job of putting that together. If you can articulate what you put together, I think that will be helpful.
then I get bonus points.
You get bonus points. Yes, absolutely.
So consolidated. That's a kind of an easy one. It's I would point to the military as a consolidated kind of organizational structure.
Mhm.
Looking for models outside of Salesforce that might represent this. You've got high command and control. You've got global processes. Their tasks are considered critical. And I would say that often the Salesforce projects either start here or they start in the federated block. It either is we're going to do this and this is how we're going to do it, or it's very uh, it's very flexible, and each business unit has their own went out with a credit card and bought their own uh, uh, Salesforce org, and they're putting it together, um, and they may or may not be collaborating. Um, they don't have a high degree of command and control. Um, I think the two top ones require some real effort to get there, and that's where you start to get some value. Uh, the effort requires a great deal of collaboration and cooperation, and you can't just say, um, do it my way.
Hmm.
Um, you got to negotiate and you got to figure out how it will work. And and you also can't just say go out and do it however you want to do it. So the confederated, the business units are working independently, but they are actively sharing best practices between them. Um, and key learnings are shared between units so that they all can grow and do better what they're doing. Uh, but there are a number of businesses where, let's say you have each business unit is divided because it's a different customer base. Maybe one is serving government and another is serving retail customers and others serving businesses, or it's based on geography, one serving India, another Japan, and another the US. And they need some independence about how they work in those environments. Those environments are very different from each other. Um, but in terms of the platform, they need to share some commonality and some learnings. The hybrid, um, we work in a regulated industry, an industry that is heavily audited, and it becomes very important. Governance and change management and technology best practices are incredibly important. But we've got multiple business units, and those business units need the ability to define what is value for each of them and what do they need out of Salesforce in terms of that value. What should the solution look like for them? So the hybrid up here in the upper right um, is where we're headed, I think, in terms of our own work.
Very good, Charlie. I think it's a very nicely articulated, right? You want to have a centralized control, or you want to have a collaborative approach. I I don't think there is one size fits all. Or um, the generally what I have seen with my experience, a hybrid approach. You need, because it's a governance. So governance means it's a collaboration. If you are in a unless it's a military kind of situation where you got to command and control everything and everybody follows because there is a blind follow. um, I think most of the organizations follow the hybrid model, and when it comes to hybrid model, you see a lot more collaboration, and you're also sharing the best practices across business units if you have more than one business units or even geographic locations. So this is yeah. If anyone is looking to implement governance and administration operating model, I think this is a great slide for you to take a look at it. Thank you, Charlie, for putting this together. Let's move to the next topic. I think it will be an interesting one. We can
Uh,
all talk. Before you get started, Charlie, I think you get excited on this one. We
yeah,
all can talk about operational, I'm sorry, I can't even say this
no,
right.
that word is a hard one. That's a
It's a
mouthful.
hard one, right? So if you want to do
Operationalization.
operationalization, that's great. So if you want to operationalize all the procedures and governance things that you put together, um, it's not an easy task. And now you're talking about why it is important to operationalize it. And so, what's your point of view on this, Charlie?
Well, I see the first two on the left as needing to be balanced against the three on the right.
Hmm.
And that that most of us, our personalities tend to want to gravitate toward either that left side or the right side. We would either like to control things,
Hmm.
reduce risk, or we would like to be adventuresome and try new challenges and do lots of stuff. And those are kind of two different approaches, but somehow in this world of Salesforce governance, we've got to balance those two as opposed to say we're going to choose one side or the other. And in our operationalization, that balance between those two sides has to be very clear. Now, when we're starting out with a COE and putting governance in place, it generally the focus is going to be on reducing risk and policy compliance. So, do we have SSO or multi-factor authentication? Do we have too many people with system admin rights? Have we got profiles that have been named something else, but really they're a system admin under the hood? Um, do we have good security for our PHI data? Uh, do we have a way to restore data? All those kind of things are going to be felt while we're building the foundation for them. They're going to be felt as putting brakes on the right side of that, the right three. Um, but they really need to be put in place. And then how do we, within that structure, um, make sure that we're enabling those three on the right side? Now, uh, I started out with the title of Lean, Lightweight, and Agile Governance Framework. And I decided that there's no way in most organizations as complex as what we're working in these days, especially ones that are highly regulated or audited, that we're actually going to be lean and lightweight. We're, it's pretty tough to get there, but we can drive toward that and we can push hard.
I,
And that's the tough thing within
I
that kind of environment.
I really hear you. I think it's a more of a journey. You don't operationalize right away. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of support. What I've seen, Charlie, within this whole process, this is where the executive involvement and commitment come in place. It's a like anything else, right? If you have a corporate ethics standards and policies, it comes from chief ethics officer or chief human resource officer, making sure that we are all following the compliance. So when it comes to Salesforce, I believe it is not. I believe it is mandatory that we get a good support from the business executives and the technology executives. The need for you to operationalize and make sure that why are we doing it? Now, you see this reducing risk and then enabling policy compliance. But what do you get out of it? What is the real outcome? I think you have summarized it very well. And then the only thing, the larger the organization that you have, the lean, lightweight, and agile governance framework, in my opinion, it's a debatable. It's everybody talks about it, but the companies do it right. And I think, if I remember correctly, you said yeah, some Silicon Valley companies they release quite a few releases a day.
Oh,
Yeah,
Netflix is doing 1,000 um, changes a day, and this is a very highly agile process that's been set up. Um, the CarMax is another company that does incredible agile work. Um, just the speed at which they release new features. They're not bundling them up and doing it once a month. They're doing them as they're ready and pushing them out the door, one little change at a time.
I think necessity is mother of invention. If you don't release, maybe competition from Netflix will release the same movie on their channel. So you better release one, right? So it's all about who releases faster in Netflix, even though they don't have a regulation as much as we have in healthcare industry or pharmaceutical industry. Well, I think operationalization also, if you think about, it is it's all you see all these good points, right? Enabling the based value based innovation, enabling velocity, enabling timely delivery. In my opinion, This gives you a disciplined approach for yeah, continuous delivery, number one. Number two, um, if something goes wrong, if somebody is not compliant, when I say somebody, yeah, yeah, business unit or an org, it is easier for you to escalate to the right people at the right time because you have a policies and guidelines and procedures in place, so you can identify where is it going wrong and how soon you can escalate it.
Hmm.
And if you recently noticed the hack that has happened in the US for last 9-10 months, it's been going on for a while. You unnoticed it. Imagine the damage that it caused.
Yeah,
Same thing here. If you don't have the procedures in place, the damage it's happening inside Salesforce, you wouldn't know.
right, right.
And that's how I looked at it when I read this in the paper today. When it's paper is always internet, there is no paper anymore. So when I read this, wow, this could be applicable to Salesforce. Everything is great. You log in, users are happy, but the damage that is happening behind the scene, do you know what's going on? I think this is going to,
Not likely.
yeah, I think this is it's a great way to look at it. So now let's move to the next topic, and then always whenever I go and ask money for my projects or for our projects here wherever I work, first question is, okay, why am I giving you money? What are you getting it? Show me the money. Right? No, you should give me the money, I'll show you the money. So that is the challenge, right? So the KPI indicators are important. In my opinion, it's not only for getting the money to implement what you need, but is educating the stakeholders the value of the COE, especially on the admin and governance. So would you like to share some of your thoughts based on what you see here, Charlie?
Um, so I think of these as the CSAT stack as being kind of strategic uh, uh, KPIs, and the other three as being more tactical, telling me more details about what we're actually doing, and and the but the CSAT is are we is what we're doing resonating with our stakeholders? Do they feel like we're helping them comply? Um, does the um, business owner feel like we're helping them meet requirements they don't understand? Does a uh, business owner feel like they can rely on us to support them with business continuity, information and tools and processes? Are the delivery teams feeling supported with deployment? Um, and from a value perspective, does business feel like we're supporting uh, the value-driven development that they're wanting to see happen? Um, if we could get good scores on all four of those, then it probably tells us that we're doing all these other things right.
Mm,
Um, and if we've got scores that are not real good on these four, we may need to look at these other more tactical ones to see what things are out of line. Or it may simply we need to be looking at communication and collaboration. But um, governance, what we're looking at is how many people have elevated access privileges, for example. Um, Not merely do they have system admin profile, but do they have privileges that allow them to do things we don't want? Can they change IP addresses? And should they be able to? Uh, what security tools are in place for each environment? Do we have Shield? If so, which environments does it show up in? Can we identify whether it's enabled? If it, would we know if the license were allowed to lapse? Um, Data growth. Are we reaching Salesforce's governor's limits on data or on file size? And is that something that we need to plan for because we could have problems with it? And audit compliance. Are we staying current with what we may need to be complying with in the next audit. These audits change over time, and it's not um, what is asked today in an audit is not the same thing that was asked 10 years ago. And in the Salesforce world, they're getting put under the microscope more than they used to be.
True.
Uh, so delivery, um, what did we deliver? How many environments are we managing? How many users are we managing? How many cases are we processing? Is that number of cases that we're having to process going up? Does that mean that there's more demand for our support and we need more people, or are there more problems that ought to be addressed in some process manner so that there would be fewer cases created? Um, and the number of user stories delivered may point to whether we're enabling agility and velocity and timely delivery. Um, they are indicators at least. And then risk reduction. I think code coverage shows up. If we're just meeting minimum code coverage, it may represent that the rest of our code base is maybe not as tight and might be sloppier than it ought to be as well. So it's it's an indicator. Um, if we've got if we're meeting just 76%, then what other kind of things are we just sliding under the door with? Do we have too many triggers on the same object and not looking at it? The API version, I mentioned that earlier.
Mhm.
So these are some of the indicators that I'd look to. It takes a while to be able to actually produce some of this and to be able to reliably report on some of it. And I feel like we're kind of just getting there, especially on the left side.
Great, Charlie. I think it's an excellent way to measure and report at the same time, reduce the risk. But in my, I think I want to clarify one thing here, Charlie. When you talk about case, you're not talking about customer cases. You're talking about internal incidents.
And terminal, yes, yes, thank you,
All right. So,
thank you.
yeah, no, that's a great point because everything that, especially you and I do today, is all about how many requests I kind of get in and how often I get it and how soon can I resolve. So if by just putting together that case management to track internal incident, it shows that there is a good maturity around how you want to approach. Now, that's a good one. And I also want to bring a couple of points to the risk reduction, Charlie. So you have given a great two examples of code coverage and API version. I also would like to measure how many violations were given to us. Let's say you run
Ah,
admin governance. When auditor comes in and checks our environment, okay, you got 300 violations. So that means we have a lot of work to do. And so that is one thing that it comes to my mind that
at 300, I quit.
yes, or you may not have a job. So that's a different
Or I
problem.
get fired.
That's true, right? So we got to be mindful about what kind of violations. And another thing that I have noticed, Charlie, I'm sure you agree with me as well, with respect to the overhead cost. Overhead, the overhead costs, sometimes the users, let's say if you have multi-user environment, one user might be presenting in multiple places. As of today, Salesforce counts everything if you are present in 10 instances, it's just 10 users.
Right.
And sometimes users, they get really overexcited, they get an access and they never log in. So those things I consider overhead costs, right?
Uh-huh.
And then sometimes you create a sandbox and he sits there. So
Yeah.
it is like it's not a great idea. What if your sandbox has got some real data that somebody's logging in, trying to steal? So the overhead cost, I see it's a huge risk
Hmm.
for us. No, it's a overhead cost is a risk as well as risk in terms of compliance and the cost in terms of cost, which is very expensive. The total cost of ownership If you think about measuring your sales force, let's say you are spending $10 million on licenses and you are not able to manage, 1% overhead cost is going to cost a lot of money. If you have full sandboxes, that cost money. So it's very important that we manage all these things, and that's where I feel you are reducing the risk in terms of the cost, in terms of compliance, in terms of overhead, or whatever you call it. Is that fair statement, Charlie?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think some of um, some of that is going to come out of financials in terms of being able to do a KPI on that. But yeah, those would be some great additional items to put in and find some ways to measure.
Great. All right, so we are, man, the time is running. So 3:50, so we have 10 minutes to go. So let's go to the slide. This would be our final slide. So I'm just going to quickly walk through so people who are watching this one, so we will have some time for question and answer. Always look at designing the COE model. So today we are talking about the governance and admin piece of it. COE you can have multiple responsibilities or divisions within the COE, Salesforce COE. Today we are looking at admin and governance component. So you got to have a good design of the overall COE, and then you have to implement it. And then within the COE, you got to pick an admin and governance subsection, implement it, and make sure that you're educating people. This is the biggest lesson that Charlie and I learned, and we've been working together for a number of years. You can have all these cool procedures and cool technology, but if you're not educating people, it is as good as having no technology. It becomes very less useful. And monitoring metrics, constantly look at the metrics. If you are if you're a head of sales, you will be looking at your dashboard on a regular basis. How many new opportunities and how many closed opportunities, which one is falling through cracks. Same here. It's the same as running your call center or your sales operations, and enforce it. If somebody violates it, you got to be able to enforce. And it is any one violation here. It could be very serious violation. It could be a simple warning kind of violation. But if it is a serious violations happen, that your environment is not safe. And if people are not listening, don't give them. They're not your friends, they're not your buddies. You got to follow. If things don't work, you got to escalate. And then on top of this is as I said, the COE, especially the admin and governance, a lot of organizations, people are they're silent heroes. They're always in the background, some companies, but we got to make sure that they are brought forward and they're recognized for what they do and how they do stuff, at the same time celebrate the success. So with this, we certainly would love to discuss more, but we are coming to the end of the hour, and we will take some questions. So Charlie, thank you for joining. Uh, so, so Charlie, in your experience, the question here is generally how long does it take to start to implement an MVP style Salesforce COE?
I think it depends on how readily you can get the stakeholders lined up. I don't think you can. I don't think you can implement one without there being some alignment with some of the stakeholders. In this wheel here, you've got on 3, educate relevant IT business owners. I think it may be before you can start to design, you've got to do that. And so maybe you can get together a design in a couple of months, and maybe over a year you can get iteration one. Um, I think it's a process. Iteration one, I don't mean that you wait until a year to start acting, um, but a year maybe you start feeling like your team is gelling and it's, your team has a sense of what they're supposed to be doing and why they're doing it, and other people have some sense about that as well.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. I think there is no specific time frame for you to do to implement, come up with an MVP and then implement. The second question, Charlie, with respect to what type of resources do we need to make this happen?
Well, you've got to have some people that know Salesforce administration well, and and you've got to have somebody somewhere who knows both uh, information security tools and their interaction with Salesforce. That doesn't necessarily need to be a full-time member of the team, but somebody needs to be able to translate um, security processes and tools into Salesforce speak, Salesforce language. Um, if you just go to the Salesforce people who have system admin, they know what Salesforce can do, but they may not know exactly how that ought to or could tie in with enterprise IS structure. And so that's required. And then I think there needs to be somebody or buddies who is very good at negotiating and collaborating, communicating with the stakeholders, and kind of selling this to them and getting them on board.
Great. I think I agree with you on that, Charlie. I know we have 3 minutes left. This is my personal question for you. What is the most favorite part for you of working in COE, and what is the least favorite for you in working with COE teams?
I like finding solutions to things that people say there's no solution to.
Great.
And when somebody says, no, we can't do that, I want to say, well, why not? Or, well, what if we did it this way? Um, so, and there's no tool for that. Well, I want to prove that wrong and find out if there is. Um, so that's something that drives me. I'm not very excited about turning permission sets on and adding permissions to a profile and that kind of thing.
Got,
I know a little bit about doing that, but it's not a favorite activity.
gotcha. No, I agree with you on that. I can tell you about my favorite part of it is this. Um, what is the most exciting for me for about COE? You are one of those. The COE is one of those. The most important or one of the most critical functions of Salesforce ecosystem, but it is always is not as glamorous as a delivery leadership where you produce 10 sprints all of a sudden you produced a large system, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
but it is it's a but for me the most exciting part, under the hood you know what is going on.
Hmm.
It's like a lab, an X-ray, a new what is that? X-ray, not a technician, the doctor, radiologist.
Radiologist, yeah,
Right, your body looks pretty cool outside, but you probably when you take radiology, especially if you are going to a radiologist and when they scan it, they know what the challenges are inside. So
yeah.
I consider working in the COE is like, hey, I'm a radiologist. I kind of know what's going on in your environment. If I really understand the platform. That's the most exciting part for me, right?
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah,
radiologist,
yeah.
but
That's fun.
the least part of it, to become a radiologist, you work your back off to get to learn so many things, constant learning, constant struggle with respect to finding the right people, putting the right procedures in place, sometimes having this unpleasant conversation with people that oh, I don't want you to take away my rights.
Yeah.
You are creating a lot of problems. So those kind of things. But hey, I would call it. Without that, I'm not going to be the radiologist. So with that only, I can learn. And I thank Charlie. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh,
So
this is fun.
yes, and our contact information is here. Anyone wants to reach out to us, please reaches out to us via my handle. Twitter handle is there, Velu PCRM, and Charlie's LinkedIn is here. So feel free to reach out to us, and we are happy to share more. So we will have this kind of sessions periodically. The next one, we are going to talk about data. How do you use data in the right way? What can COE do to make that process smoother and understand your data mastery? So that's going to be the next topic. So please stay tuned. We will post our next event on LinkedIn or via email. We will reach out to you. Thank you. And you have a great day and be safe and happy holidays. Thank you,
Happy
Charlie,
holidays.
for joining.
Thank you, Velu.